So welcome everybody. I'll let folks in as they arrive, but so far we've got a nice intimate group here. My name is Moira Villiard. I'm the grant writing specialist at the Arrowhead Regional Arts Council. My main role there is just helping folks with their grant applications. My main job is a full-time artist. I'm doing painting, public art, all sorts of murals, animation, and a wide range of visual arts mediums. And yeah, I will be talking to you today with Darin about pricing. I don't know if Darin, you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Darin Bergsven. Welcome to my guitar studio. I teach guitar lessons here. I host a show called Coffee and Guitar every Saturday morning from this studio and bring in area guitar players to play with me once a month. And play gigs around town as a freelance musician, both solo, with different bands. I'm playing right now with the Owls Club Band, Big Band, and with Maxie Child's trio. And then, like I said, a lot of solo work, primarily instrumental jazz stuff. And pricing is a challenging topic. It is fraught in a lot of ways. Um, so I'm excited to be here for this conversation.
Sweet, thank you. And I'll just make a note that I pulled a lot of today's content from the Work of Art series from Springboard for the Arts. I'll put a link in the comments maybe a little bit later to the actual workbook, which it's a free 100+ page workbook that has a bunch of free resources on everything from record keeping to marketing to just literally everything you could need to be an artist or work as an artist. I've added a couple of things just from my own personal experience, and then also in having Darin here, that there'll probably be stuff that we add that isn't in that workbook. But like I said, I'll link that in the comments. But just a note that today I pulled a lot from there. So a little overview of what I got for you today. Again, if you have anything, I already see some comments in the chat that we can get to, but what's one thing you'd like to learn today, or multiple things? If there's stuff that you want to ask, like in the midst of stuff, you can unmute or throw it in the chat, however you want. We try and keep these more conversational and less, I don't like to put you through lots of lecture stuff. Just get to the point. I'll kind of go over sort of like income goals and how people decide on those, some of the psychology and cost factors that go into pricing your work, ways to get organized, which we'll kind of talk about a little bit, and then some notes on times and maybe just a little bit of the psychology of being an artist too. So from the Springboard for the Arts workbook, they kind of split like your income goals into two areas. People either want to build wealth, like you want to make money, you want to make a profit, you want to have, a little bit of extra spending money from your work, or some people are okay with just breaking even, getting your main stuff paid for, your supply costs, everything like that paid for. Yeah, and so in the building wealth category, your income is more than your supply costs in practice. Ways to encourage wealth, you can charge per hour, or you can charge for what you need plus a little extra. That's kind of where I feel like I fall in my category as a visual artist. Is sometimes my prices fluctuate just based on what I need. So I don't know if you do this, Darin, but like for me, it's like if I need rent, I'm gonna try and sell my work for the price of rent if I can, and make that goal. And in the instance of like breaking even, you're obviously only charging to recoup what you spent to create that work. And I guess a common advisement is to do your research and look at, what are folks charging where you are, and then what makes you different. And you can add to your price tag when you're able to identify those things that make you sort of different in what you do. Do you have other thoughts, Darin?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say that I charge differently in the same way that you're talking, but certainly different different work that I do requires it requires different things of me. So I know that I charge more for my gigging. I charge more for gigs than I do for teaching. If you broke it down to an hourly rate,
Mm.
my gig rate changes too, depending on it. It's more complicated than just what I need. It's also, I think, with the in the music world, it's very common to have to balance what I need with what six other people in the group need, with what the venue needs and is able and willing to do. Um, so I have different rates depending on whether I'm playing solo or whether I'm playing in a group. It's sort of based on needs, more based on the kind of work that it takes to get the job done. Um, it is I definitely put myself more in the building wealth, putting food on the table category, and and it's difficult to come up with a rate that's marketable and competitive and actually accounts for the kind of time that it takes to put out a quality product. That's a challenge.
Yeah. Um, wow. Okay. This is pulled directly from the springboard thing, but I thought these were some helpful examples that are in the booklet for different ways that they give some examples of how people will charge for their work. So in scenario one, they kind of allude to consistency. So basically it talks about a jewelry artist whose supplies kind of fluctuate, and they can kind of track where how those supply costs fluctuate throughout the year. So she tracks the price of silver closely so she can buy at cheaper rates, allowing her to compensate for fluctuating expenses. I think it's just a message to like keep in mind about the fluctuating supply costs and figuring out a way to price with those supply costs in mind if you're an artist who works around with supplies. And then I kind of like scenario two, where it talks about a theater artist has been struggling to sell this 3-act play because the cost of production is out of the budget range of the smaller theaters in his area. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about market and like what happens when you're in a smaller market versus a larger market later in the slideshow. But from that large piece, he creates 3 short plays out of the larger play and creates a payment plan schedule to meet the price point of the type of theaters he's looking for. So in some instances, people will be able to take like one big project and break it down into smaller pieces and market that. I think of examples like as a visual artist doing exhibitions and maybe having like this bigger, this for instance, I have a show called The Rights of the Child, and it's a series of paintings that generally travels together, but sometimes you can take pieces of that show and submit it to places or offer it in spaces if people can't necessarily, if you charge for your exhibits, if they can't necessarily afford to have it. And then third one, a ceramic artist's new line of ceramic drafting pencils is taking off in high demand. In order to increase their profitability, they raise the retail price in accordance with the perceived value, but keep the original price in place for bulk orders. There was a word in there, perceived value, and that's a person or a group of people's opinion of what they think a product's value is. You can raise or lower that price in your products, but that may not change the value of the product according to your potential customers. And Springboard lists different factors that impact perceived value, which include trendiness, scarcity, nostalgia or symbolism, and the necessary add-ons to a product. I don't know, Darin, do you think there's other things like specifically in music that influence?
Well, in music, the perceived value is tough because uh, sometimes generally venues maybe it's different with private events. If someone's planning a party, a wedding, a corporate event or something, they're looking for entertainment. If you're talking with a bar about booking a show, a more commercial venue, it's difficult uh, to to communicate what the value of your product is sometimes when it doesn't directly translate into money in the till.
Mm.
Um, if you're building a scene or something. I had Billy, my teacher Billy, used to tell me that he would talk to managers at restaurants all the time about having him playing his music there is a lot like having a parsley on your plate of steak. Now you can serve the steak without the parsley, but what kind of a steakhouse are you?
Mm.
Um, yeah, yeah, that can be a little tricky. Um, I find myself, and I think a lot of musicians find themselves having to sell um, the value, the perceived value, and really push that. It's hard sometimes when you're working with bar owners who are just looking for that dollar sign, and not necessarily working directly with the audience who's coming in to pay. I don't know, it gets tricky. Definitely, this plays into what different musicians are charging in town and who's charging what. Um, the perceived value of my show needs to be high if I'm going to charge 3 times what um, the other person down the street is, or
Right.
the person who's coming in next week. Um, so that can be tricky. I know that people earn a wide range for the same 2 hour set of music, and that has all to do with perceived value, and it gets really sticky,
Yeah.
especially when you try to talk to other musicians about what they're making.
Yeah,
Can be
that I mean
tough.
that leads to the comment that's in the chat. Do you change prices based on the market? I got 250 for a purse in NYC, but I can't even get 50 here in Duluth. I get that. I think that was a part of what Darin and I were talking about, right? While we were in the chat here before you guys joined. Um, it's up to you. I think it's always better when artists stand together and try and you know, collectively work with each other to start moving the price for art just higher and higher so people can actually make a living as an artist. And I think that requires a lot of just community building. But then Darin, you bring up the point of like sometimes you don't want to like share, you know, what you charge for your specific work. Um, it's kind of
Yeah, I
hard.
know that when I started teaching lessons full time here in Duluth, the first thing I did was call everyone I knew who was teaching and ask them what their rate was because I didn't want to come out and start undercutting folks.
Mm.
Um, and and now that started a conversation, and a few of us are talking. One of these teachers keeps coming back to me now and saying, "I think we should all talk about upping our rate." But that's a difficult thing to do in group with a whole bunch of self-employed people. It's hard to move forward confidently with something like that
Yeah,
because you're also trying to be competitive.
right. Yeah, no, I think I was kind of giving the example too before everybody got here about like, yeah, an instance where the guy signed a non-disclosure agreement, so it can't even talk about the specific place, but just giving the example of when places might contract with, might be looking for artists specifically in Duluth, right, or specifically in whatever you know, smaller town that you're in, and trying to, you know, in my instance, it was a graphic design bid. So like multiple people in the city are probably submitting a bid and thinking about, well, if I was in the Twin Cities, I could charge a lot more and probably expect to get the money, but thinking about who my competitors are and thinking about what they charge, they generally in smaller towns charge less than at least in the visual arts, charge less than metro areas like Minneapolis and St. Paul. And so in that instance, I did charge less than I normally would have. Kind of regretted it, but also kind of was leveraging the fact that like the opportunity was a really big opportunity. So I would recommend, like, if it serves a purpose to you and if you can figure out a way to make the most of whatever opportunity it is, I'm, you know, for me, I'm not opposed to lowering my prices if the opportunity is a good one. But if it's just kind of like a standard opportunity and like it's not going to benefit my career so much and it's going to be too much work to put into the project or the artwork for little, you know, impact on my career, then I generally try and stick to, like that purse, and try and stick in the $250 range if it's not serving you any purpose, or if it's ending up costing you too much to lower that price. I think for artists and stuff too, like the supply cost is so much higher in addition to like the time that it takes to make things. So it's definitely tricky, but I would avoid lowering unless it serves you in some way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would have a hard time lowering my rates in different markets. I know that I turn down gigs. I know that I turn down gigs that can't pay me. Um, it's tough because you have costs. You've got to cover your costs. How are you going to cover the costs of a $250 purse with $50?
Yeah. And additionally, like it's I don't know. In an ideal world, people would want to pay more because it means that the thing that they're purchasing is worth more value. And I think like for myself as a visual artist, I've gotten to a point where I can, I started probably professionally painting maybe 10 or 15-ish years ago. I mean, I was a teenager, but I was hustling. And so, at a certain point, it was kind of like every 5 years I would try and add a zero. People don't want to pay much for younger folks' work, but at a certain point, I was like, I need to start adding these zeros or it's not going to be as cost effective for me. And for the most part, as I was building those clientele, like there was sort of an excitement for the people who supported me earlier on to see that my work is like increasing in value. So looking at like Serenity's comment there about getting nervous about losing returning customers, I definitely think like those loyal early on customers are happy to see when you raise your prices. I've got one who's been buying my work since I was in college, and he literally is just like, yeah, keep raising the price. It means that all the paintings I bought for like $50 are now worth, so much more. So
I will say that related to my lesson rate, I don't see this. Oh, maybe it has worked with gigs too. Um, another piece of feedback I've gotten from other teachers is to up my rate, consider like double my rate. And what I'll find is that uh, I'll find an entirely new clientele who's excited to pay for me because I cost 50 for a half hour lesson. Because I cost double what everyone else, now that'll be attractive. I've not made that change. Um, I like teaching kids that live in Duluth neighborhoods here, and I like that they have access to me, but that has been advised multiple times. And I know that on the gigging front, I kind of took that advice because I was interested in having less but better gigs, and I just in the last couple of years sort of doubled that rate. And what I found is that I get enough work to pay for the work that the cheap work that I'm losing.
yeah.
Um, so I'm making the same, if not more, and my gigging rate has doubled in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think
I
too.
haven't made that step with the teaching because I really think it would change the neighborhoods I'm teaching to,
Right.
and that's not a change I'm interested in at this point. But I am pretty confident that if I doubled my teaching rates, I would fill there would be a transition, but I would refill my schedule with new students.
Yeah, I wonder if I can just switch over to this psychology one. No, revealing all my cute stock photos. Maybe I did do the psychology. Yeah, I think that was more the perceived value thing. But I do think that's a part of like that maybe a part of the perceived value that they don't have listed here in the springboard is just like the seeing that something's more value. Like some people just, I don't know, when you think about flights, like not a lot of people take the cheapest flight, because, with the cheap airlines, because there's kind of a fear of safety or all these things. And I think it's kind of a similar psychology with artists, where people might associate like lower prices with maybe defectiveness. And so
You don't want the cheapest wedding band,
yeah.
but
I know for myself, I'm kind of that way where it's like, I don't know if I want
yeah,
like pay a couple extra dollars for this.
yeah. Serenity, just coming back to your point though, I did in that changing my gigging rates. Um, I can think of two examples of conversations. One with another musician who previously hired me for a lot of gigs. One with a that was previously a regular venue for me, and both of them are off my calendars. And both of them came down to specific conversations about, no, this is my rate. No, we can't pay that. I'm sorry, we'll have to part ways. And that was quite painful because you don't want to lose that returning client because there's a relationship there and it is emotionally this is all fraught. But at this point, like I said, I have a handful of well-paying gigs now that does what having to be out every night scraping for not great gigs. It's worked out, but there was definitely a painful transition, and did come down to really concrete like conversations I didn't want to have, and that's tough.
Yeah, I think I might skip over this one. I mean, some of it feels like it might be speaking to the obvious, but like, the
Yeah.
cost factors that go into pricing your work include labor, material, the overhead, and profit. This is all in that workbook. I think we're kind of getting into regarding grants, what market are you in? We kind of got into the market part. I'll get back to that one. Yeah, now I'm like, I should have done this in reverse order, but like your time matters. And sort of what you were talking about, Darin, like there's kind of two outcomes a lot of the time where it's like you can either make more money per gig and you might get paid less often. But sometimes it means you can work less hours too, because you don't have to spend all of that time like doing these smaller gigs. Or you can make more money or make less money per gig and get more paid more frequently and work more often. I think earlier on I was doing the making less money per gig and just trying to say yes to everything. And I think that has at least in the visual arts world, it has a benefit of like the networking and connecting with people and getting the exposure. And the value is there in just like getting quick opportunities. But the downside is you're really tired. And at a certain point, I feel like it's beneficial to try and get to that point of like making more money per gig and doing less of the gigs altogether. Because then you actually have time to enjoy the money that you make off of your artwork. There was a class that I took on like, I don't even remember what the class was about, but it was about making YouTube videos and stuff. And how to make money off of like becoming a YouTube influencer, which I did not do. But one of the points that they made that stuck with me was just the reminder that your hours are kind of finite. They are limited in your lifetime. You only have so many hours. And so for me, like in taking that deep dive into becoming a full-time artist, I never charge hourly because I don't want to assign this consistent value to my hours just because I feel like my hours are worth tons of money just in the context of my life. I'd rather spend more of it, enjoying the fruits of my labor than actually doing the labor itself, which sounds kind of lazy, but I also feel like it's what everybody deserves to get to at a certain point. And so just thinking about it, like, I think it's just a good reminder, like by default, if you charge hourly, there's a concrete limit to what you will earn and you're the one setting this limit. It's not necessarily there, like these other factors of markets and things like that sort of do come into play and influence it. But at the end of the day, it's kind of up to you to set that price and to make it worthwhile to your customers and clients and to figure out the ways to up the value of your work and how people perceive it. So just a reminder to think of like, what is the value of your time to you?
Along those lines, Diane asked, should I try to keep track of the hours it takes to paint a 16 by 20 to figure out pricing? Diane, I've been doing that the last few years. Like when I'm editing a video for my show, how many hours does it take me to create this 2 minute long video, and what sort of price do I need to put on that product? And that was helpful. I guess it was helpful for me as a practice early on. I've stopped entirely keeping track of it. I kept track of it long enough to figure out that like what takes me about 3 hours, and that puts me at this price of um, whatever unit. I got to a point where I felt like I had a good price, and then I got good at making these videos, and they take less and less time. And I moved away, like Miri's saying, quickly from the hourly rate for the product. It helped me establish what a good price for that product would be, but once I got good at putting out that product and it didn't take me as long anymore, and now I kick out one of these videos in the morning, um, the price is still what it is. It is worth that value, and I've just gotten really good at putting them out there.
Yeah,
It's been
that's
a
a good
helpful
point.
tool. It's been a helpful tool. Calculating those hours was helpful in initially trying to come up with a value of the product, um, but there's a balance too. I think with what Miri's talking about, just what is the rate of the product. When I talked to my friend Matt Wasmond, who plays saxophone for Big Wave Dave and the Ripples in town, he books all of their gigs. I was talking with him this morning and about this conversation, and he said that they just charge $1,000 a set, and they don't talk to anybody about hours and how that breaks down. Eventually, they break that down and divvy up the cash among the band members, but they've decided that a set of music is the product, and this is the price. Um, and then they just focus on making sure that that product has a perceived value of $1,000 to all of the venues and private um, planners that they're working with. And some of the people in the band are just thinking hourly, and some of them are thinking differently about it. But everybody leaves with their cash. Um, it's a balance of those two calculations, hourly and just the overall value of the product, I think.
Yeah, I think like so in that Springboard for the Arts workbook, they have this whole section and there's again like lots of formulas that you can use if you're looking at just like the revenues and the costs. I don't know how much they get into the value of your time, but I do think like what Darin said about like at a certain point, like I think using hours is helpful just for that reference point, but then like definitely at a certain point, you're going to get better at doing your thing and you're going to get faster and you shouldn't get punished, financially for doing the job faster than other people. I do that with like my graphic design and stuff. Like some clients require for their, I don't know, reporting purposes to list hours. I just put, what is the value of that work? Because some things only take me like, a poster might take me 30 minutes. Whereas it might take another person like, a whole day to
A
make.
week.
Yeah. So it's kind of like understanding that there's added value and the fact that you can get stuff done fast is kind of one thing. And then additionally, I mean, for paintings, I made my own formula and I can't even remember what it is, but it was something like so it would be multiplying the length and the width of the painting and then dividing that by some decimal. It was like 0.5 or something. And you can set that decimal, just play around with what would be a price that doesn't make you hate making the work. And that's kind of how I landed on how much I wanted to price the painting for, because it was just like, okay, if I do this for, like 12 by 12 paintings are in the $100 range for me, like knowing that they're a small piece of art, but knowing that like anything under $100 is just not worth my time at this point. Even if I'm quick at making the work, in addition to like getting the work to somebody and everything, like I don't want to be making just like a quick $50 that's like, inconsistent. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't like what you said about how what price can I play it and can I put on it and not hate making it. That's often, I don't like it, but that's often how it feels with gigs. I do all of this calculating about what's my value, the what do I want to make, and calculating back to what's my weekly rate, my daily rate, my hourly rate, which this the guide does well at walking you through. You can do that calculating. You can think about competition and what's competitive in the marketplace, and then when you go to book the gig, there's just what this person on this gig pays $40, and you just like, well, can I play that and not hate it? Is often what it comes down to, which is a bummer. But we just get, I get calls all the time that are just, this is the situation and this is what we're paying, and it's on me to agree to it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And often that's really the ultimate measure is, can I play this without hating it, or or hating myself.
Yeah. Yeah, hating yourself as the manager who's underpaying yourself.
Right.
I need a new manager. This one doesn't pay well enough. Um, I think,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one thing I like to think, at least in the painting world, is like, your work is always worth the highest price a person has paid for it. So like, recently someone bought one of my, like my personal paintings that I did for like a much higher amount than I would have, that I sell my commission work for. And it just got me thinking like, that is the value of my work. Like once you make that decent sale, like that, $1,000 painting, like there's no reason you shouldn't,
Mm-hmm.
be able to price your other stuff at that rate. And of
Yep.
course, like, it's again, getting back to that perceived value, you still got to convince people that that's, what it's worth. But at the same time, if you have people who've already like, they've committed that $1,000 to that painting, like you can demonstrate like it's possible people will pay that much for this work. Yeah, and then like I was doing a little digging, and there's some comparisons of like, bands. It's very straightforward. Bands that are paid or that perform for $3,000 are paid $3,000. Bands that charge $250 are paid $250. Like you get what you ask for, and it's like a simple, like, common sense thing to think about, but a lot of the time, like people will complain, like, I don't get paid enough for this stuff. And it's like, well, you set the price,
Yep.
And
I usually get stuck on the last one where I assume that people don't have enough money to pay, so I like undercut myself before before it even gets started. I just generally price too low because I want to be nice.
yeah,
Um,
bad habit.
uh-huh, for sure. That like my work is worth the last thing I got paid for it is a really good measure too, and that's what got me charging more for my gigs recently. I had one venue that said yes when I asked for double, and suddenly nothing. That's my rate now.
Yeah,
Um,
you don't have to like, double it overnight, right? Like you can
no.
build up over time and be like, let
Mm-hmm.
people know and communicate that, especially if you have like consistent clients, let them know like
Mm-hmm.
this is getting serious. Like
Yep.
I have to charge more in order to accommodate like, the number of requests that I'm getting, or
Yep.
I got rent to pay. And you
Um,
want me to survive and have a studio or have a space to make the work. So,
exactly. Uh, Mary, Diane's asking about needing help keeping a record of sales. Sales is not something that I work with. Do you have experience with that?
yeah, we can jump over to my little side of organize your tracking, and found a little quote. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. I would say, with keeping track of sales, let's see, the little booklet give kind of has this list of things that you can use, file, like an actual file folder system. You can use bookkeeping software. So for myself, um, at a certain point, it's really cool as an artist to reach the point of being able to like have business expenses. So like being able to subscribe to QuickBooks, which is it's a app and online bookkeeping source. Basically, it's kind of tied to TurboTax and that whole suite of services. And it's what a lot of nonprofits use. So that's kind of how I found it. Is they've got like QuickBooks nonprofits, QuickBooks self-employed. You want to look into QuickBooks self-employed. And basically you can like input your credit card, bank account, all the things. It's safe so far. I've used it for the last 5 years and had no issues. and it'll track your purchases, and it will put them into a little list, and you can swipe right if it's a, personal expense, and swipe left if it's a business expense. Serenity's face is like, wow. And so I've been using that for the last few years. I still do keep a paper system just in case, technology isn't perfect and it's not automatically going to always sort things properly. But at a certain point, you can tell it, like, here's rules. If I spend money at, for instance, Michael's craft store, I have that set to automatically be a business expense because I don't do art as a hobby ever. It is always a business expense. And so it just throws that into a category. And then, like, at the end of the year, when you have to do all your taxes and stuff like that, it's just all kind of in one place. And again, I will go through, like, myself and just make sure it didn't, double put something in a category or whatever. But through that service, you can also use invoices, which I really like, because it's basically like you type in your client's information. It's got 3 options for how you can invoice. You can invoice hourly, you can invoice flat rate, and then you can invoice some other way. I don't remember. But then you just type in that information, and you can just, with a push of a button, it sends an invoice to your client. And then you can mark when it's paid or not paid. If it's not paid, you can send a reminder. And it's very impersonal. So when I have clients who I know are just kind of ghosting me, I'll be like, oh, my QuickBooks just automatically sent that reminder, which it doesn't, but you can say it does because they probably don't use it. And then, it keeps all those invoices in one place too. And you can track your income that way. So I highly recommend QuickBooks. It's literally just like the push of buttons once it's all set up with your accounts. I'd also recommend, like, if you can, try and get specifically just a credit card that is for your business expenses, and just keep paying that off as you need to. QuickBooks also sends you reminders for paying taxes. So if you're at that point of paying taxes on your business, it gives you an estimate based on whatever income you've had in so far. I just give the government a big chunk of money every 3 months, and I don't look at it. It just comes out of my savings account. And then if I get a tax return, I get a tax return. And yeah, so QuickBooks, that's great. Otherwise, you can use a typical spreadsheet. There's lots of templates you can find online, or even in Google Docs or Word or Excel. They all have different sort of spreadsheets that you can use. The checkbook, old-fashioned, but it still keeps track of things. And then they kind of list these others. I don't know if people use paper ledgers anymore. And then these are kind of my little tools that I use consistently. I love these little receipt folder things, expanding files or whatever. You can find those, all of this you can find on Amazon or at office stores. Just lets you label your receipt. So when you're breaking it down, here's my supply cost, here's my travel cost, here's my coffee with a client cost, which is all costs. You keep those receipts and can just put them in here. And then additionally, I keep them digitally because I send it all to my accountant. And so I have one of these little scanners. And there's all types of little scanners, but it's literally just a little portable thing, and you can just shove your receipts in it and it makes a file. And so I will name my files, just the amount of money and whatever either the cost that I just spent on that receipt plus the store and what it was for, or I'll name it, the client plus what they paid me and the date. And that way it's just when you go to your files, you can just literally do the math based on file names. And I've been using this thing for the last year, and it's significantly made my life less stressful. I don't cry when I have to do my taxes like I used to. So little tiny scanner, super fast, super recommend it. Let's see, we got QuickBooks, spreadsheets, and then invoices. You can either there's tons of templates online for making invoices. But if you can afford it, QuickBooks is great. And
What-
additionally, it's a business
Um,
expense. So,
Mary, with QuickBooks, I'm curious. I use PayPal for all of my invoicing. With
uh,
QuickBooks, is there a how do you pay for that? Or do you just pay for QuickBooks and then invoicing is free, or do you pay per invoice? Is there a
yep.
percentage?
So the whole thing is like paid for. It's like a yearly subscription, and all of the services fall under the subscription
Okay.
fee. Um,
Do you happen to know what the subscription is?
Gonna look at it right now. Let's see, QuickBooks, self-employed. I've had it like automatically paying for itself for so many
Uh-huh.
years that I'm just like, I don't know.
Uh-huh.
um, let's see. Oh, it also tracks your mileage, which is really
Mm.
freaking cool. Especially like those trips that you go to, like if you're a quilter and you need to go get some, fabric, it will track your miles as long as you have that turned on your phone. And then again, with the same
Oh,
system, you can swipe right or left if it's a business expense.
man, technology is awesome and creepy.
Yeah. Let's see. So self-employed is 15 bucks a month.
Okay.
Save 50% for the first 3 months if you sign up now. Uh,
15 a month. That's probably pretty similar to what I'm paying just when I pay a percentage of per interaction with PayPal. It's similar.
yeah,
I'd
the
like to do the
mileage
math on
tracking.
that. That's interesting.
The mileage tracking has definitely been a huge like benefit because I think you can either like deal with this isn't tax advice. I have to always give that disclaimer, but personal, in my personal experience, my understanding in taxes is you can either like keep all your gas receipts and try and keep that stuff organized and, do the little scanner route, or you can just track your mileage, and the state has a standard mileage that it will pay you. And personally, I think it amounts to a little bit, more than what you actually pay for gas. So I go that route. And then that's where the mileage tracking on QuickBooks is nice because I can literally like get a tax write-off for the miles that I travel. Like if I go down to the cities and have to meet with a client, that's like $70, one way, trip. Or, again, any meetings I do, any supplies I buy, all of that is tracked, and it really adds up. I feel like last year, I don't know how much I got as far as tax write-offs, but I feel like it was close to about $4,000 in tax write-offs just from traveling to like drop off art at galleries and, all of the meetings that I was doing or teaching, stuff like that. So definitely recommend. Let's see where.
I keep all of my receipts in a folder, and then I enter them in a spreadsheet once a month, and the spreadsheet adds them up in categories for me,
Oh, nice.
and know by the end of the year.
Yeah,
Because a folder full of receipts at the end of the year was um, tear inducing, like you said.
I think I'm still at that point where I have my little like folder of receipts, but at least it's got the little tabs. So like you can go through and do the math all at once. Yeah, and then we talked a little bit about like what the market you're in. Yeah, and unfortunately, in my experience as a visual artist, like I've made a lot more uh money off of gigs that are in the cities than I have here in Duluth, and that just kind of sucks. But you also have to factor in like, I mean, I think it's a little cheaper to live here in Duluth, and in other parts of greater Minnesota, it's probably a lot cheaper than living, in the Twin Cities. So there's kind of a balance of like, what's the cost of living where you are. There's a book that I started reading, and then it just was a little outdated for me, but it was like how to have I don't know, no hour work week or something. And I was like, goals, I want that. And the guy, basically the whole secret in the book was this dude like outsourced a lot of his stuff. And he was like, if you can live in like a place like Mexico or something, where like the cost of living is literally like, I don't know, a tenth of what it is in the United States. He literally advised just leave the country and work remotely. So, and sometimes I'm like, yeah, no, I could see in some instances where that would be possible. Quick note on grants, because I've been, especially with the grant deadlines that are coming up this week, Friday. A lot of people have asked, if it's okay to pay yourself in a grant. And I would say absolutely, like, make sure you are paying yourself. And if you're not, at least put that as an in-kind option on your grant and saying, like, this is a passion project. I'm okay with not being paid, but like, make sure you address it when you're writing grants, because we're at a point where, I don't know, a lot of people have trauma from whatever point in the past where it was looked down upon for paying yourself as an artist. Like, now we want people to pay themselves. And so
My recent experience has been that I've been turned down for essentially the same grant. One application that talked about all of the equipment expenses to that was what I was writing for. The other was just paying myself. I spent that money on all that equipment, but the paying myself application made it. The buying the equipment application did not. So that's been my recent experience. I try to avoid anything that's not wages on my applications now.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, like, it comes down to the feasibility of, like, if you're not paying yourself, is it really possible for you to do this? Like, are you going to survive, like, doing this while doing, like, whatever day job you have? I think a lot of panels would rather see that you're just focused, like, your time is covered. That adds a lot more feasibility than, somehow it adds a lot more feasibility having all of those supply costs written in there, because you got supplies and no time, the project is definitely not happening.
Well, and like we're talking about, so I pay me my wage, which is what it is, or the grant I get that grant money for my wage. I might spend that wage on this camera because I need it to do that project. But I still paid me my wage, and this camera is a business expense that'll come out of the taxes on the end. I've reduced my income. And in effect, that all the same stuff happens.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the grant reviewers like to see wages, and they like to pay artists.
Yeah, and I definitely, like, for folks, I think you're all probably a little familiar with grants, but like, at least at ARAC, our grant panels are made up of community members who are artists. So, everybody understands that, for the most part, everybody should understand that, paying yourself is really important. And I think what matters most is, like, being consistent, with that pricing, or like, hopefully adding value over time to what you're charging. Like, that's the goal for all of us, is to get to a point where it's a little bit more livable. And then just making sure that you're valuing your work. Let's see. I don't think I have, sorry for the dizziness. More time. Oh, I got a little video. Let's see. I'm going to stop sharing for a second, because I think videos can be tricky. And I'm going to share this little video, hopefully. Let's see, share. And then I think that will basically end things. It's pretty useful though. Let's see. Google Chrome, advanced, video, basic. Okay, video, computer audio. Oh, shoot. Okay, there we go.
We got you.
Can you hear that?
Hey, artists, are you applying for fun?
Yep.
Okay, we will. I watch everything at 2 times speed because I hate watching videos, but I will slow it down for you. But in case you're like me, watching videos at 2 times speed has actually increased my, efficiency at watching videos. So,
Hey, artists, are you applying for funding, planning an event, writing a business plan? You need a budget.
Hearing you need a budget can set off waves of panic, confusion, and frustration. And it's okay to feel overwhelmed.
That's why Springboard for the Arts created this short video to help you understand what a budget is, what it's for, and how to make one. So let's dive in.
What is a budget? A budget is a forecast of financial activity that shows income, money coming in, and expenses, money going out, and the difference between the two, also known as the net. A budget shows those income and expenses over a set period of time.
Rather than thinking about your budget as a math problem, think about it as a tool to plan for your future. You may be dreaming about creating a performance, or holding a series of workshops, or applying for funding to finally get that community art project up and running. In all of those scenarios, you'll need to plan what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Talking or writing about your project or proposal is one way to capture this info. A budget is another one.
Here's an example. If you're planning to create a performance that will eventually have an audience, one of the first things you might need is a rehearsal space. You'll also need a performance space. You'll need someone
We lost the sound.
attached, including paying yourself to project manage and or perform. So those costs will go on the expenses portion of your budget. Once you have a rough idea of what costs you'll have, you can look at what kind of income you'll need to cover those costs.
You might think, I have no idea what kind of income I can get. My grandma said she'd give me $20, but that's it. It's okay not to know. In fact, most organizations, for-profit and not-for-profit, are making an educated guess when it comes to their income and expense projections, knowing that the numbers will shift with time.
If you're just starting out, do some research on available grants or funding sources. Then make a list of those that might be a good fit for your project. Plug those amounts and any other income sources into the income section of your budget, knowing that they may change. You may not get all the income you want, but you can't hit a baseball you didn't swing at, so swing away.
Choose a time period for your budget. A one-year budget is common. If you have a rough idea of your income and expenses, you've chosen a time period for the budget, and you've captured that information somewhere, congratulations, you have a rudimentary budget. Now what?
You'll need to write down your budget in a format that's easy to read and understand. You can write it down on a piece of paper first, but it's a good idea to transfer your budget to a shareable format like Excel or Google Docs or Google Sheets. A word about formatting. To make your budget easy to read, separate the info into two sections, income and expenses. For each section, make 2 columns. In one column, write the income source or expense name. In the other column, write the amount. Subtract the expense total from the income total. The amount is called the net, and this goes at the bottom of your budget. Pro tip, a vertical budget format is easiest to read. Hopefully the net is 0 or a positive number. If it's negative, you'll need to adjust either your expenses or your income to get your budget to 0 or a positive number.
As you start to fill in your budget, you might think, how do I know if I'm making an educated guess? I'm just writing down numbers. We like to recommend that artists ask themselves 2 questions. 1, what would I do with this project if I had all the funding I needed? And 2, what's the bare minimum I need to make this project happen? Number 1 is what we call the blue sky budget, and number 2 is what we call the no snacks budget. Your budget will probably fall in between these 2 extremes.
If you calculate the net and find you have a large surplus and your project is not for profit, go back over your expenses to see if there's an area that's underfunded. You may find you can pay your artist more or pull some portion of the project out of no snacks land into a realistic and more comfortable space.
Next, think about the audience for this budget. Who is it for? Yourself, a funding organization, your friends and family? If the budget is for you, you might include a lot more detail than if you'll be handing it to a funder or a family member. Pro tip, you never want to share your no snacks budget. No one else needs to know that you can do your project for $100 in a pack of chewing gum, because that budget often means that the artists involved, including yourself, won't get paid for their time and energy. You do want to be able to share your blue sky budget because you never know who can give you that funding.
A final thought. Budgeting is not the time to be timid. Be ambitious and practical in your planning. It's important to identify your hopes and ambitions for the project and have a rational set of numbers to back up how you're going to do it. Don't let uncertainty hinder the scope of your vision. Hopefully, you have a better idea on how to create a budget for your arts project. If you have questions, feel free to get in touch with Springboard for the Arts at info@springboardforthearts.org.
Yay, okay. So I think that's all I've got for you guys. Unless you have other questions, we can take some, but we're at 6:30 and that went by really fast.
It did go by really fast. I'd love to stick around for more questions, but I have a guitar student waiting to join me right now, so I'm going to need to say goodbye. Miri, thanks for having me. Thanks for including me in this conversation, everyone.
Thank you so
Don't
much.
undervalue your work. Bye-bye. Thanks. I'll see you next time.
Take care. Yeah, feel free to unmute if you have questions or thoughts too. Got anything? We good? Anything that's unanswered or still like up in the air about the weird world of pricing your stuff? I have to sneeze. So. Oh yeah, for grants, how grants are handled tax-wise, that's a whole thing. So technically it's not legal for people to give tax advice unless they're registered tax people, but just from my own experience, like grants are taxable income. And so my goal as an artist is always to spend as much of that money as I can on the business so I can get those tax write-offs. And hopefully like lower what the overall income is. So you don't end up paying a ton of money that you don't necessarily have because you spent it already on, supplies and things like that. I used to go to, I used Current Tax Services, but the owner of that place just retired, but they worked a lot with musicians and stuff like that. So they just referred me to accountants here in Duluth. If you can find a tax place that specializes in working with artists or has experience in working with freelancers, I think that's super beneficial because then they have a better sense of like how things break down for you. But yeah, as far as how grants are handled tax-wise, they are income unless you do the work to spend it down. That kind of helps.